So once you've introduced whittling to a group of children or an individual, there's some steps that we can expect as a trajectory of progressing their skills. And you could progress skills in lots of different directions. This is just one example of stepping stones to developing whittling skill progression. So we'll often start children with a opinel knife or a rounded tipped knife, just because there's one less hazard involved without the pointy tip. And when children start whittling, especially younger children who are just learning to get used to the knife against the wood, it's often about finding the correct or easeful angle of the knife. So sometimes I say just practice the motion without taking any wood off, and then very slightly tilt it and you'll just get under the bark. And this is the first step that I get children to practice, just peeling the bark off sticks, and they love doing that. They might need help when they get to knots, and you can either do them for them or show them how. But peeling the bark off of a stick is step one. Then we might go either to pointing the stick, where they're starting to work the end more, and that generally takes a little bit more pressure in the wrist, but is the same action of just moving that knife away, maybe a slightly deeper angle. They really like making pointy sticks. After that, I like to introduce doing patterns in the bark. Now it's winter here at this time of year making this video, so it won't show as effectively as in the spring when the sap is running, but you can get children to mark out a line or two parallel lines on their stick. Sometimes we do it in this way, holding the stick. For younger children, again, it's really handy to have a surface to actually lean that on, so they can just push down and rock. And once you've outlined those marks, in the springtime it's super easy to peel that off. This time of year less so, and this wood wasn't freshly cut today, so it's even more sort of stuck on, as it were. The bark's clinging on to the wood more. But you get the gist of that. So we can do patterns in the bark. With just being able to peel a stick, it's fun to do dampers over the fire to utilise that, but many children are happy just to create patterns with the bark on a stick. So a next kind of step in developing whittling skills, I think, is to help the children become aware of planes of space. So it's much easier just to go all the way around a stick without really paying attention to one side being a side, just following the curvature. So if I turn this around, we'll just work on this end now. We're going to work with a plane of space. So this is like getting them used to that being one side and turning it over, being aware that it's opposite the other side, and being able to thin a piece of wood in that way. This is really useful for things like butter knives. Children love making swords, envelope openers, those kinds of things. You could also create a cube in this way, but just to bring a consciousness to shape and form in a way that we haven't really done before. After that, I like to bring in learning about creating notches, which uses a little bit more thumb strength. So we can do lots of different kinds of notches, but it involves digging a bit deeper and not all the way to the end of the stick. So for example, we can create a little divot here. That's a nice simple beginner's kind of stage towards a notch. We can also use what's called a stop cut through the wood fibres, where you're really leaning again like we did with the patterns in the bark, and then coming up to that cut and stopping just before it and levering off that bit of wood. So we're going to create in that way a notch, and this notch skill can then be applied to things like pegs and making mushrooms out of wood, which are really nice fun craft projects to do, especially when mushrooms are in season. Once you've understood about cutting through the fibres, creating a stop cut, you can then do that on a slightly bigger scale with sawing through some of the fibres on a bigger piece of wood and then battening down towards it. This helps children really become aware of the grain of the wood and how tools can travel through the grain of the wood, and how they always like to follow the grain or find the route of least resistance out of the wood. So you can see that in our spatula projects and malleting projects as examples of that. Another project that's really nice for children to be able to do is to create spoons. Now, this is a more advanced project, and I would recommend getting the children proficient in all those other stages before moving into that, especially with notches and understanding the grain of the wood and how things travel. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of some stepping stones to progress through with helping children develop their whittling skills.